Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Steve Cannane. Coming up, Pauline Hanson running for election again, despite promising to quit politics. Why Paul Hogan is comparing the tax office to the Taliban. And what did Julia Gillard put on the iPod she gave President Obama? Our panel tonight, Craig Reucassel from The Chaser, Chris Berg from the Institute of Public Affairs, and in Canberra, ABC political correspondent Gillian Bradford. Well, Tony Windsor might have stood beside Julia Gillard when she launched her plan for a carbon tax, but it seems 2 weeks really is a long time in Australian politics. The independent MP is now calling for the federal government's strategy a mistake. That's too short on information. He says that's why Australian voters aren't supporting the scheme, and there's no guarantee that he will either.
I think they've put the cart before the horse a bit here. They've sort of given the conclusion without a number, without a target, without a price. And then said that there will be a debate within the community. So I'm not surprised that there's been a bit of a reaction to this.
Mr Windsor has also warned the government against using a taxpayer-funded advertising campaign to sell the carbon tax, calling that a silly idea. Speaking from Washington, the Prime Minister wasn't so sure.
Look, I'm just not going to rule anything in or anything out on government advertising. There is a role for government advertising to get information to people.
Gillian, if Tony Windsor thinks the government has put the cart before the horse and that the strategy is a bad idea, why was he there at the announcing of the strategy 2 weeks ago?
Oh, look, to be fair on that day, remember Tony Windsor did say, and his quote was, "Nothing is settled." So while the Greens were smiling and doing a small victory dance, Tony Windsor was on the effective sideline of that press conference saying, hey, we want to see a lot more detail and nothing is settled. But I think clearly what's changed since then is he would have been surprised about just how ferocious talkback have been, about just how ferocious the feedback has been in his own electorate, and he's not going to go down with the government on this. And I think another element to this is in his own electorate, and of course Tony Windsor has tied himself to a lot of independents. I've heard from one Liberal strategist that Tony Windsor may actually be here trying to shore up the support of the New South Wales independent, currently in an election campaign, and provide some distance between the independents and this carbon tax.
Because there's a crossover between Tony Windsor's seat and that independent around the New England area.
Absolutely, and no love lost between Tony Windsor and the Liberal and Nationals, and he would be doing all he could to try to help that independent.
Craig, are these comments from Tony Windsor about the reaction he's got in his electorate in the last couple of weeks?
Well, it's interesting watching that interview because he certainly seems to claim it wasn't. And Tony Windsor, I think, more so than Oakeshott, who, seems a bit flittish at times. Windsor's quite consistent about it. He doesn't seem to scare too easily to polls, I think. But what was interesting about the interview last night is how many times he mentioned the rest of the world. And that's a real worry for Labor pushing this thing, because if his whole position is I'm only going to do this if the rest of the world's on board, then he would have known that ages ago. He would have known that a long time ago. So him turning up to that press conference already, he must have had a lot of doubts there. So I don't know what it's about. I mean, I think Gillian's right. He wasn't on board at the beginning, so I don't think he's jumping off. But he seems to be a long way from being on board if he's starting to talk about, well, if the rest of the world's not coming with us, then we're not going to do it. I mean, that's a big worry for them.
Chris, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, Craig's absolutely right. Nothing has changed in the debate, so to speak. The difference between Tony Windsor at the press conference and Tony Windsor today, there's no particular difference. There's no policy change. But what he's obviously struck by is the government's dismal failure in that interim period to sell its own policy. But I think it's fair enough to say that he was behind or was supportive of the government's measure. If you're not supportive of a government measure, you don't stand behind them at a press conference. There are a lot of other things you could have been doing.
And you don't say you support the process. He said he supported the process.
He supports the process, and presume he's read the 5-page document or whatever it was they released before he was at the press conference. Now, either he didn't and he's extraordinary, like he's got no sense of due diligence whatsoever to know what he's signing up to, or he has and he's just been so struck by the reaction.
I think his point is that the actual document itself is a lot about we might go this way, we might go this way. His perception still seems to be as part of that Climate Change Commission, and they're still in the process of exploring. And I think he's right from a political perspective as well, that, announcing something without any basis behind it and then making it harder to argue that has been bad for the whole idea, and particularly bad for Gillard.
But now he's turning around and making it tougher for Gillard to do what he what he signed up to support, which is a community process under the terms that he agreed at the press conference.
Gillian, what are the implications for Labor of these comments by Tony Windsor? Is this a little speed bump, or is this more like a roadblock?
Oh, look, I think simultaneously they'd be concerned by what Tony Windsor has to say, but at the same time they'd be far more concerned about how ferociously they are losing the public debate and whether their own side can hold its nerve, because while there's no move against Julia Gillard, there's no rumblings about what's going on despite these absolutely catastrophic news poll figures. 6 months more of this debate, if they can't turn this debate, if they can't start framing the question away from cost of living questions, Labor backbenchers will lose their nerve. They're already saying, we're not quite sure why we're doing this. We're not quite sure why we stepped out into the public debate without having the answers. And of course, it's not reflecting in any concern about their leadership at the moment, but 6 months more of being bruised and battered like this